Hello and welcome to Can You Hear Me at the Back, the podcast about all things voice and communication.
Hi, Leon.
Hi, Aundrea.
So, with a sound and a movement, how are you feeling today? Ooh, look, it was already like there.
I was just trying to do some Foley.
Okay.
I've been teaching a lot of radio, so I've been doing Foley. Sound of a knife. What is my sound and movement?
Sound and movement.
That's my sound and movement.
Okay.
I'm feeling quite foggy-headed.
I wonder if it's just like a time of year.
Maybe.
Aundrea? Yes, me.
In a sound and a movement, how do you feel at the beginning of this podcast? Wow, that started to go in a direction I wasn't prepared for. and now you've reminded yourself not to laugh into the microphone. Yeah.
I was like, don't laugh into the mic, Aundrea, don't do it. Oh,
because we don't want to cause car accidents.
Yes, or
Shout out to Abby
deafness.
Green. Not that she's had that car accident just yet, but she might.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible.
Because you kept laughing at her in the car. I mean, not at her, but like she was in the podcast.
Imagine if people were just terrified of my laugh. If that was like a thing. I'm super conscious now. Okay, so what are we talking about today?
So we're doing part 3.
We are doing part 3.
Part 3 of the things that we've been talking about for a while.
Yes.
And the third part is communication.
Yes, communication, which is a part 3 of the entire 3 parts.
Yeah, which started with us talking about what is a voice coach. A voice coach.
A voice coach.
It's a German one. What is a voice coach? What is a voice coach? And then we talked initially about anatomy and physiology.
Yes.
And then acting.
That's right, it's voice and acting. And now we're talking about communication.
Sure, third prong.
Yeah, all good. So, we've separated into 2 things, which I think are quite clever. Well, but I mean, you came up with the terms of it. So I wrote them down.
You don't have to tell me I'm clever every episode.
Do I?
That's fine. Last episode you were like, and then you said this thing, and I wrote it down because it was really interesting.
It was really
And I was
interesting.
like,
I
this
just
is
really
kinda
appreciate
embarrassing.
words. Aww. Don't be
I'm not-
embarrassed by your cleverness.
I'm not good with compliments, as we know.
So
there are 2 parts.
There are 2 parts. So there's the everyday or the ordinary kind of communication. And then we talked about the extraordinary, or the performance or the heightened context of communication.
Yeah, the extraordinary. So extra.
I'm getting such Pippin vibes right now. Ugh, serious Pippin.
You got to do
vibes.
extraordinary things. Like mopping the floor and sweeping the hay and.
I actually don't remember how that song goes, but I know that.
Oh, I do. I've got it in my head. I MD'd it some years ago. So, everyday communication.
The need to communicate.
Yeah.
I feel like this is actually quite big. Now that I'm actually thinking about it,
Yeah.
and probably because I've got a slight philosophy hat on, which I'm going to put to the side because it's bothering me. Because there's so many ways that people talk about communication and everyday communication, and how everyday communication is not necessarily accurate, and how it falls. And then you get like all these other kinds of big philosophical gaps, and I feel like there's so many different schools of thought on how we communicate, how we effectively or ineffectively communicate, and then what that means. But I think if we were to bring it back to us, that's how I'm gonna keep it small or simple.
Okay.
If we were to keep it back to us, I think our job as voice coaches would, to go back to that question, what does a voice coach do?
Yeah.
I think it's to help people effectively communicate in their everyday lives, for the everyday, for the ordinary.
Yeah. I've been having this discussion with actors over the past few weeks. Well, training actors. And I was talking about how frequently people have to repeat the thing that they asked for. or that they've said. How many times do you say something and then somebody says, sorry, what? In a shop, in a restaurant, in wherever. How much of your life do you spend just repeating yourself because somebody didn't hear what you said? Especially those who have very short vowel sounds, very quick staccato methods of speaking. They don't have that sort of languid, one of my favourite words, languid, sort of legato, long line of phrase.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's to do with speed, sometimes that's to do with pace, sometimes that's to do with stress patterning and all sorts of other things. And in everyday life, if you're spending half your life just repeating yourself, think of all the time you're wasting. And all of the things you could get done.
And it's really frustrating. I think accent reduction or accent softening comes under this as well. For people who come to English as a second language and do spend a lot of their time repeating themselves or trying to make themselves clear or as accurate as possible. And that is exhausting. It's also really frustrating because you're never really sure. I mean, when I first moved to London, I was never really sure if I was using the wrong words or if people just couldn't hear me. That was a big thing that I was struggling with. I was like, can they not hear, can they literally not hear my voice? Or am I not using the right thing and therefore it's not connecting? Like, am I still saying trash can and they're going, I don't know what a trash can is. I don't know, and they're still trying to figure it out when I should have really said rubbish. So it's like there are like two things of that. There's like the lexical, and then there's kind of like the basic, like, am I being heard? Is my voice being efficiently used in this space, or is it being drowned out by like some of the other customers? That's the word. I was like,
all the other Costas. Where are you?
Was it
in Greece? Cyprus? What is it called? Costa.
Costa.
Yeah. There is, different layers of communication. And our job, predominantly, I'm finding, more and more precisely, is to work out precisely whether it is a lexical issue or whether it is a phonatory issue or whether it is an intentional issue or whatever it might be, and also whether that's got something to do with the willingness for that person to be heard just like as an individual. Do they feel that they should be listened to?
Yeah.
Because if you feel like you shouldn't be listened to, then it makes it really difficult.
Yeah, or you're not. What was that you were saying before about younger people feeling as almost anticipating that they're going to be cut off, and therefore the end of the sentence is just kind of done, and they don't ever finish the sentence. I find a lot of people, especially working with training actors' voices, that happens quite a bit. Where like they're falling at the end of the line, not necessarily because they don't have the breath capacity or the resonance isn't there or whatever it is. It's mainly because the intention is gone. They got to the end and they're just not confident anymore. They're very lost and very confused, and it's I'm giving up on whatever this is. Because I don't feel it. But the same thing happens in communication. If you're faced with something, say you're getting a cup of coffee, or as I would say, coffee. If you're getting a cup of coffee and the barista behind the counter is continuously going, I'm sorry, what? At what point are you gonna go, oh, never mind? This is just like, I'm just not gonna have my coffee and walk away, which is very sad. But I think that's normally where I get people in terms of like the coaching. Is like, they're like, well, I can't get basic things. I need help.
Yeah. Which, if it's impinging on your life, then the level of communication is not sophisticated enough. It's not high enough. Whether that's in a sophisticated way or whether that's just in a sort of bold way. Like, it needs to be bolder. Let's do that. So, whatever it might be. But it's deciphering deciphering what the problem is initially, and then also devising a way of trying to get somebody to move into a new way, a new pattern. And what's really interesting is that I find that whenever I work with people, especially new people that I've not worked with before, I ask them, so what are we doing? What's the thing that you want to achieve, that you want to work towards, whatever. And often they'll tell me things, but they're trying to, it's always from a generous place, but they're always trying to tell me the thing that they think is the problem, that they feel is the worst thing.
Right.
And as they're telling me, I'm identifying that it's something completely different.
Yeah.
But I understand how they've got to that conclusion.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you have to work it back 3 or 4 steps to work out what it is that's actually causing that thing. People don't listen to me. Yeah, the reason people don't listen to you is because you just don't speak loud enough.
Yeah.
Or if you do, you start the sentence loud and then you drop off.
Yeah.
So then you've got somebody's attention, but they don't hear what the point of the sentence was. Or conversely, you rush the first 3 words of the sentence, hit the key word, and then you're kind of like, what? What are you talking? What's the purpose of this conversation? And then they have to repeat themselves. But what they do is they just repeat the same pattern.
Yeah.
And it doesn't resolve it.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to kind of hear what people think is the problem.
Yeah.
And then when you say, actually, I think it might be this, let's try that first.
Yeah.
And then it might have an effect on the end result that you're experiencing. But they think you're kind of like a voodoo witch doctor. Which I love the look in people's eyes and they're like,
I get the same thing when it's like when I'm working on like accent reduction or accent softening, or I'm not really sure what we're calling it now, but because
this week.
because a lot of times it is a simple thing of just like, oh, it's just that consonant. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, that's it. Let's just tweak that consonant a little bit, and then it's absolutely clear. And it's so and this, I think this is going to bring us into the extraordinary of it. It's really interesting how people overanalyze a little bit interactions, you know. And so if I say, okay, so a question normally has like an upward intonation at the end of it, right?
Depends
so we
on the
know that's a
question.
question.
Sure.
Yes, and it does depend on the question. But like if we're gonna do like a general broad kind of thing, it goes up at the end of it. And a lot of times people will come and they're like, well, people keep saying I'm angry, or people keep saying that I'm too aggressive or whatever that is. And I think a lot of that is because I was like, if you take Britishness, I was like, there is a lot more questioning intonation that happens with things that aren't necessarily questions. And I was like, and if you're making all those things downward inflections, or you're not putting an upward inflection in it at all, I was like, then it does come off as being hostile. I was like, that's one of the big differences between American and Britishness, is that some things, you know, you do question, and then other things are statements. And so it's literally just one little thing. And they're like, oh, I never realized that. And you're like, yeah, well, that's my job.
And just like one of the points that jumps out at me about that is like the difference between the lexical thing and the lexical point and the intonational point.
Yes.
And one of the things is that British people will say right.
Yeah.
So we'll go, yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Right. Meaning, yes, okay.
Yeah.
Whereas Americans will say correct.
Oh my gosh, I was just talking to somebody about this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't realize that. And then in the conversation I said correct, and then they were like, oh. And I
and what it feels like to a British person, from my own experience, is it feels like you've just passed the test. You're like, that, thanks, I know that was correct.
Yeah.
Moving on. Like, it has this kind of weird sort of
Yeah.
testing kind of paradigm to it, like this sort of quality to it, where you're just like, correct.
I
Like,
do
it wasn't, okay,
I do the
Mark
same
1,
thing.
it's really
And
funny.
when I was in the classroom and somebody asked me a question and I was like, yes. And they were just like, oh, okay. And I was like, yeah, well but I was like, but what you were saying was right. I have no other way to say it except for yes or correct. And to say right, you know, I feel like as an American, to say right implies that something else is happening. If you were to ask me something and I'm just like, yeah, does that make sense? Yeah, right. But like in that kind of a sense, like it feels more indirect. Like there's something else there, almost.
But I think right, when we use it as an affirmative, comes from all right.
Yes, which we don't really use a lot.
Rather than correct.
Yeah.
Whereas you guys say correct and we're like, all right. I agree.
Yeah.
And I think that's right. And it's really strange that there's like this difference. And also it's the cadence in it where I would kind of go, right. Like it's kind of right. whereas you would go correct.
Yes.
But. Like it's a perfect cadence. It's kind of like but. It's like finished.
If you were to say
there
right,
is no more to this.
Right implies to me, right, but. Like there's nothing else
like,
there.
so it's not finished, right?
There's something else that needs to be said. So I that's an interesting thing. I never really thought about that.
I noticed it a lot.
Oh my
gosh. It a lot, especially with working with Americans.
Yeah.
Well. Not just you, but like the other American that I know.
See, I'm turning.
It's not even true.
So extraordinary.
Thanks.
And I think sometimes wait, what happened? What I do? Did I cut you off?
No, you just going extraordinary. I'm like, yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Correct.
I missed it. So extraordinary, or the heightened context of it. I think I tend to start with the ordinary and then work up to the heightened, the heightenedness of it, unless. Yeah, I guess it depends on who I work with though. If I'm working with the first years, it does tend to be more of kind of, we're still doing the finding your own voice, finding yourself, and finding yourself through that. And I think jumping from them to a heightened context is sometimes a leap that they're not necessarily able to make.
Absolutely.
And so I'm still kind of working in the ordinary and then going, okay, here's the ordinary scenario. If we would put that on stage or we put that on screen, what changes to make it extraordinary?
Yeah. And I think in the training of actors, it's very different to working with people who have trained in whatever capacity that they've trained in, because I think that because what happens is with especially first year actors, that what you're trying to do is make them aware of some of the behaviours that they have,
right?
So that then what happens is that they, every time you say right or correct, it's going to like put me off now. What happens with them is that then they start to be able to get to a point where they're able to articulate whether they're doing the thing they intended to do or whether they're doing something that is completely counterproductive to the thing they're trying to achieve. So if they are shortening vowel sounds and they're dropping the end of sentences and they're not beginning sentences or they're not hitting keywords or operative language, we know that that's not going to communicate what their intention is. And therefore, they need to be aware of that so that they can change things. They can change the minutiae of that, really. They can change the moment-to-moment interaction with that language, with the need to communicate on stage. But if you can't do it as self, then how on earth are you going to do it on stage?
Or you're
it's
not
so far
doing
away.
it you're not doing it at all in your everyday life. And I've got students now who it's like, people tell me I'm not, my teachers tell me I'm not loud enough. And I was like, well, you're not. And they're like, well, I feel loud. And I was like, yeah, because you've been doing this your entire life, and of course you feel loud. I was like, if I'm going to put you up on a stage, no one's going to be able to hear you at all.
How often is it that you speak to people who are more than 12 feet away from you?
Like never. Well, yeah, but I mean, I'm
we
loud.
do. We do, because we have conversations across restaurants.
We do.
But, sorry, people.
Life as a voice.
But and also as a teacher, I mean, if you lecture or you do anything in a seminar or a large workshop environment, you need to fill the space with your voice. Having a sort of meek and mild, tiny little voice just doesn't wash.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. It's too flaccid. It's too sort of. It needs to have more,
Weight, meat.
Yes,
to the sound. Yes, and I think this links to a whole lots of things. It links to that, what we talked about before about natural. It doesn't feel natural. This is when I got a lot of students who are like, well, it doesn't feel natural. And I think the response is, well, of course it doesn't feel natural. You wouldn't talk to your friends this way. I mean, if you do, that's a choice, and you might not have friends after that. But I was like, you're not communicating in a way, in an everyday, ordinary way. You're communicating something that is bigger than you are. And the most famous line, and I have no idea who originated this, but I've taken it on board, is that it's not about you comment, where it's not about you. It's about the communication of whatever it is that you are presenting. So there's a bigger structure involved, not just you. And yes, you are a key piece of that. Sometimes you are a very key piece of that, but it doesn't. It's not about you. So you need to keep that awareness of other things that are happening and other things that are going to amplify the communication of the story.
Yeah. I had this conversation post-show with a student actor the other day, and she said to me, what I find really difficult is being heard in the space, but then maintaining a connection to the feeling. And I said, if we don't hear it,
there is no feeling.
But then we don't know how you're feeling at all. And I said, which is ostensibly just really self-indulgent, and sorry for the crudeness of it, but by any other name, that's masturbation.
Yeah.
And you're having a great time on your own. You don't need us to be here. I mean,
yeah.
We are, which then adds a whole other layer of weird to it.
Yeah.
So, like, share that with us. We want to know what's going on inside you. We want to understand what's happening with that. And then I said to her, in the next run, in the next performance, go for audibility and forge a stronger, more intimate connection with the audibility, with the connection with the audience, that will then sort of have this sort of reciprocal situation where it then connects into you even more. So because you're sharing more, you can then connect to it more. She was like, wow, yeah, I'll try that. And then messaged me, afterwards, well, actually saw me afterwards to then say, yeah,
it worked.
That works. And
yeah.
I was like, I know. That's why I gave you the advice, darling.
Yeah.
But that's the sort of thing that people really struggle with, is like the authenticity of it. Is it authentic to be able to speak that loud? Well, yes, it is. But then you're in a place of relative inauthenticity because you're within a context that is performance, that is heightened, that is other, that is, that is distant, that is whatever. It's there's a whole different layer to it that you then have to sort of negotiate and work your way through.
Yeah, and I find that with presentations too, because I coached a wonderful tech person on on a presentation that he was doing, and he just kept saying, he was like, well, it doesn't feel, he's like, I don't feel like me. And I was like, well, do you do this a lot? And he was like, no. And I was like, well, no, then it's not going to feel like you. It's going to feel like something that is different from you. And I was like, and that is okay, and in some instances that is good. And I was like, I'm not changing you as a person. I was like, we didn't go through some kind of psychological breakdown that didn't peel away all of your childhood traumas or whatever. I was like, you're just speaking at a different level than we were before, because we're communicating at a different level. You're reaching more people. I think most of the time, like you were saying before, most of the time when we talk, we're only talking to maybe 1, 2, 3 other people at the most, and that is putting a lot, because human beings do not multitask very well. But
True.
Like when you're talking about performance or presentations, whether you're acting or whether you're giving a presentation for your job, you are talking to more than 2 or 3 people. You tend to be talking to 5, 6, 8, 10 masses, millions, however many you do. I don't know. I haven't gotten that level in my career yet, but maybe I will. But it's a lot of people, and so yes, something has to change because the dynamics of it changed, and that's how it does. That's how it rolls. And it might be that there are some aspects that you can keep. You might be doing some things already that I tell a lot of students, like, oh, you know, it's the 2 positives and the 1 change that I do. So it's I like this, maybe not, maybe this is what we need to work on. This is the thing that we're working on. Yeah.
It's called again, sorry for the profanity, but it's called the shit sandwich.
Yeah.
Where you do 1 positive, negative, and then another positive.
I like that too.
Just to make people feel great.
Yeah.
Then at the same time, change the thing in the middle.
Well, because
Seriously.
Yeah, and that, I think there's a whole other thing on like critique and like and how to give, how to receive critique and
giving
notes.
And receiving. And
we're having a day.
And giving. We're doing a whole Friends episode.
A whole day. But yeah, that's a whole thing, because that's a whole nother level of communication. What do I need in that critique? What do I need in that note? And what is about me and my performance, and what isn't really about me but about something else that I can't really control, but I'll just take that on board and be like, yes, okay. But yeah, so that's a whole nother podcast.
I think critique is also different from criticism.
Yes.
So maybe that's another thing to talk about.
Maybe
we should get somebody who is excellent to critique and then a critic.
Oh, you know, I wanted to be a critic.
Did you?
Yeah, I wanted to be a theatre critic.
Just because you wanted free tickets to the theatre.
That is exactly why I wanted to
Yeah.
be a theatre critic.
You
I
didn't
also
really
wanted
want
to
to do
work
that.
at the New York Times, and I was like, but I'm not qualified to write on anything else. I was like, so I'll just do theatre.
Just gonna go and teach voice. Sure.
And then now I'm just teaching voice. So, oh well.
Aundrea,
Yes.
what did you realise doing this little podcast episode of ours?
Context. That's my word. It just keeps sticking out to me. And authentic context and inauthentic context.
Ugh,
Yeah, I know.
that's a whole series.
I know. I'm just gonna keep that in my brain. What did you learn, Leon? I realize.
What did I realise?
Yeah.
I realised that we are sort of diagnosticians by the very nature of what we do, and that we have to work out what somebody's doing and then work out how to treat it, almost in a medical capacity sometimes, or forensic capacity more than medical, and then implement it. So a treatment plan. I'm thinking quite clinically. I've been reading the Voice Clinic Handbook, so sure.
I love how we're both in different minds. I'm thinking philosophically and you're thinking clinically. We're just
Yeah.
this
When we
weird
meet somewhere in the
space.
middle of linguistics
Yeah.
and voice coaching. So yeah, I think there's lots of those layers that I'm kind of realising through the course of our conversation today. Not realising really. I mean, I knew they were there, but it's kind of highlighting them, shining a little light on them.
Yeah. I think the really interesting thing about that, which I'm not going to go on forever because we're running out of time, but I think the really, really interesting thing is that I think we like to compartmentalize things. We like to put things into boxes so that we can work on them better, because you think about when you tackle a problem or an issue or a challenge, it's a lot easier to go, oh, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, and to break it down into little pieces rather than just attacking the whole thing. It's the same thing like when you go into a lesson. You're like, yep, okay, so we've got a lot to work on, a whole lot, but clearly I can't work on everything from A to Z in 2 hours. So I'm going to have my objectives, I'm going to have my goals, and I'm going to meet that. And I think it's the same thing with when you coach as well, that I'm only allotted maybe like 45 minutes.
Sure.
And so, yeah.
It's a thing of like, how do you eat an elephant?
Oh my God.
One bite at a time. If you want to contact us about anything we said in the podcast, you can reach us on Twitter at CanYouHearPod,
Or on Instagram at Can You Hear Me Podcast.
or you can search for us on Facebook and on YouTube.
Or email us at canyouhearmeattheback@gmail.com.
You can find me, Leon, on Twitter at Leon Trayman.
Or me, Aundrea, at Aundrea Fudge on Twitter.
Please support the podcast by subscribing as a patron on our Patreon site
The link is in the show notes.
to keep the podcast advertisement free, as well as get access to cool extra stuff, discounts, bonus episodes, as well as supporting ongoing voice research funding as well. Okay, love you, bye!